Welcome to the first of two video lectures on Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid. In this video lecture, I'm going to talk about books 1 and 2 of the Aeneid. I'm going to introduce the idea of who Virgil is and the idea of Roman epic, then jump into books 1 and 2. Now this one only has 12. Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, you'll remember, both have 24 books. There's only 12 books to this one, so it's a little bit shorter. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some things to know about Virgil and what he's trying to do here, and then dive into books 1 and 2. About 40 minutes total for the video lecture. And then in the second video lecture, I will dive more deeply into books 4 and 6, with a broad overview of what happens in 3 and 5 between, and also just a broad overview of what happens in the second half of the Aeneid. Okay, so for this first video lecture, I've got learning objectives for us. Let me pull those up here. First of all, students will match Roman names to their Greek equivalents. So in Greek, we know the god of the gods, the greatest of the gods is Zeus, the king of the gods, Zeus. In Roman myth, he's Jupiter. And most of all the gods and lots of all the people, their names change. And so we're going to work on matching the Roman names to the Greek names. Number 2, students will connect story elements from Virgil to their basis in Homer. So the same way that Homer starts so many different stories in the Iliad and the Odyssey that then get built upon later by the Greek tragedians, like we studied Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. In the same way, Virgil is also going to build on those stories that get started, expand upon them. And we're going to connect those story elements back to Homer and in some cases back to the Greek tragedians as well. Students will compare Roman literary values to their Greek counterparts. Romans were not the same as Greeks. They were a different culture, a different set of beliefs. They borrowed a lot of the same literature and the same stories, but they had different values and a different way of seeing the world. And we're going to look at that. So one example that I give here, right, Ulysses, that's the Roman name for Odysseus, is not as beloved as he is in Greek culture, right? The Greeks saw him as smart and cunning, and they valued that. The Romans see him as just tricky and kind of a liar who uses trickery to win as opposed to actually winning in an honest, fair way. So there's a shift there. Odysseus and Ulysses are the same character, but the way we see them and perceive them in Roman epic changes. We started to see a little bit of that in some of Sophocles too, right? In the Philoctetes play. So we're going to see that change, that shift from the Greek Odysseus to the Roman Ulysses. We're going to continue to identify and analyze examples of metaphor and simile, specifically Homeric simile, although at this point, since we're no longer reading Homer, it might be more appropriate to call it epic simile, although we can still say Homeric simile because Virgil is building on the same tradition and he's very much trying to do something similar to what Homer did with his really long, drawn-out similes. And then last, the fifth learning objective, students will recall key characters, events, and themes from books 1 and 2 of Virgil's Aeneid. Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. Scroll back up to the beginning here. So a couple of notes before we jump in to the book 1 of the Aeneid, some things to think about. You've got to keep in mind always our great big timeline of literature, particularly ancient literature, right? So Homer and the stories of the Trojan War are taking place somewhere around, well, if the Trojan War happened, it happened about 1200 BCE, roughly. 1184 BCE is a lot of the times the date scholars will give for it, although that's a conjecture too, or that's a best guess. Anyway, so for our mathematical purposes, 1200 BCE, right? We're in the year, and for our mathematical purposes, let's say we're in the year 2000. We're just making the math easy. Instead of saying the exact year, we'll just say 2000, right? So 2000, 1200 years ago, so the Trojan War happened 3,200 years ago, right? And this is legendary stuff, so the exact numbers don't matter anyway. Estimates work, right? We get the Greek tragedians writing in the 5th century BCE. So 500 years, roughly. We're just going to use 500 as our estimate, even though it covers a whole century and there's lots of, but as we're doing our broad strokes, so that means that if we're using 2000, the year is 2000 right now, 2,500 years ago was when we had Sophocles and Euripides and Aeschylus writing their plays. Okay, well now we're getting when we talk about Virgil, we're now actually not talking about BCE anymore. We've jumped forward a whole bunch of more centuries, and we're talking about the 1st century AD. So if we're in the 21st century now, we can say it's roughly 2,000 years ago, roughly. And you know, if we were doing a more advanced study, this broad overview would not be sufficient. We'd have to go a little deeper into our dates and think about our timeline. But for our broad overview, that works for getting a sense of that. So if this is 1,200 years after the fall of Troy, that Virgil's telling the story, it's a whole different thing than the original. And of course, Homer's was a whole different thing too, because he was writing hundreds of years afterward. And remember too, this is an important point too. I said writing, but that's not accurate. Homer was never writing. The original Iliad and Odyssey were part of an oral tradition that I've talked about before, and that's a big difference when we get to Virgil. By the time we get to the Romans, they do have writing, and the Aeneid was written down. It was meant to be read, so that's a big difference, even though Virgil is trying to mimic the written styles, and by this point Homer has all been written down, and the Romans have access to it and can know these stories and know they know all the various moments of the Iliad and the Odyssey. They know they know it well, right? They change the names of the gods, but they've got it right, and it's been written down. So by this point everything is written as well. And that doesn't mean people don't still have some sort of oral tradition, and there's still not a lot of oral storytelling happening necessarily. But Virgil wrote. Homer did not. Homer spoke. So that's another difference too to think about as we go through this. When Virgil writes this, Rome is arguably at the height of its power. Or will be. He's writing at the end of the Roman Republic as it shifts to the Roman Empire. And probably the most famous name in Roman history, almost everyone's heard this name, Julius Caesar. And also probably the second most, or maybe Augustus. Augustus Caesar maybe is the first most. I'm not sure what order to put them in. Most people know those two names, even if they know nothing else about Roman history. This is in that time period. This is the sort of the crux as Roman history shifts from republic to empire, and Virgil is trying to capture in literature a story that makes the Romans worthy of makes Roman art and literature just as worthy and just as important as any of the Greek epics or Greek plays. He's trying to heighten the name of Rome by giving it its own literature. And how do you do that? You give it an epic poem of its own and you model it after Homer, right? The Romans are just as culturally important as the Greeks. That's the underlying statement Virgil really here is trying to make. So how do you tell a story like that? So you model it after the Greeks, but the Greek epics, but you try to then shift it and think of, well, you don't necessarily try to shift it, but we as readers look at the shifts and the changes in order to look for differences, and that's where it really gets interesting. Okay. Enough background. Let's jump into book 1 of the Aeneid. Okay, so book 1, what's happening here, right? So this is very much part of the epic tradition, like I've talked about, and Virgil's going to try to follow. You're going to see lots of places where it's like, oh, that feels a little bit like something that Homer did, right? He's starting in book 1, and he's going to start off by talking about a god. He's going to talk about Juno, and Juno has a favorite city. It's named Carthage, right? And Fate has determined that Carthage is going to fall. And by the time Virgil is writing this, Carthage indeed has fallen. It's had 3 big wars with Rome. And in many ways, Virgil is celebrating and they're almost their own ancient history, right? They happened way before Virgil. So he's celebrating Rome's great victories over Carthage, right? So he started, but he's telling the story. He's going back to the beginnings of Rome, and part of this, and he's going way back before the big wars with Carthage, and he's trying to explain why did Rome and Carthage have these wars in the first place, and he's trying to come up with a mythical, legendary explanation for the wars. Well, here it is. So Juno loves the city of Carthage, right? If you remember, Juno also loved the Greeks. She was never a big fan of the Trojans during the Trojan War. She knows, though, that fate says that eventually Rome will defeat Carthage. And it's a little bit like Poseidon in the Odyssey, and the way Poseidon doesn't really much like Odysseus, but he can't change his Moira, can't change his fate. Here it's the same thing, or it's a similar thing. Juno loves Carthage, but she can't change the fact that Rome is going to grow into this great city that defeats Carthage, okay? So we get this in the very first book of the Aeneid. Juno, here were her arms, and here her chariot, and here would be the kingdom of the world, if fate allowed. Such was her cherished hope. But fate, right? Fate's not going to allow it. But she had heard that men of Trojan blood would one day overthrow the Tyrian towers. Carthage is from Tyre, T-Y-R-E, Tyre. It's a settlement of Tyre, so Tyrian means the people of Tyre, and Carthage are related. Anyway, people wide in rule and proud in war would come from there to shatter Libya. So had the fates decreed. For our purposes, we can say Libya is we can say Libya is the area in which Carthage stands, right? And we have a country today, Libya, so we get some sense of them on the map too of where Carthage is as well. And think of that northern African coast on the Mediterranean. And if you have kind of an overview or idea of that, roughly think of Carthage as being right there, right? And she doesn't want to have to give in to the fates. She says, must I accept defeat? Can I not keep Troy's king from Italy? Of course, I'm forbidden by the fates, but Pallas, that's another name for Athena, gets to burn the Argive fleet and drown its crew to punish one man's crime, the frenzied lust of Ajax Oileus. And yeah, real quick, if we haven't gone into that story, a little side note. So remember, Athena loves the Greeks throughout all of the Iliad, but then she doesn't help Odysseus very much. It takes him 10 years to get home, and the reason she doesn't help her favorite is because she's just mad at the Greeks. And the reason she's mad at them is because she wants to punish one man's crime. And there's several crimes that happen we're going to talk about in this video, but one of them is Ajax went into the Greek Ajax, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing too. There's two different Ajaxes, so this is not the same Ajax who Odysseus meets in the underworld. This is a different Ajax. I know it's confusing, and I apologize for that. This is Ajax Oileus. He's a different one. If we actually look at our notes, I think it mentions, here's our story down in the notes as well. But he's a different Ajax, not the same as the great hero, Telamonian Ajax, different one. Anyway, this Ajax goes into Troy, goes into the temple of Athena, and he rapes Cassandra there. And you remember Cassandra from Aeschylus's play Agamemnon. She eventually goes back with Agamemnon, and horrible things happen to her. She's the one who can see the future, but no one will believe her, right? She's going to be in the Aeneid. We'll see her in just a minute, and we'll be talking about her. But anyway, at the end of the Trojan War, Ajax did a horrible... And it wasn't necessarily that Athena was mad that he did it. He was mad about... She was mad about where Ajax did it. It was in her temple, and that was very disrespectful. And so she punishes the Greeks, burns the Argive fleet, and drowns its crew to punish this horrible thing that's happened. Anyway, Juno's saying if she can do that, if Athena's allowed to do that, why can't I stir up trouble as well for the people I don't like very much. Anyway, so Aeneas is sailing along, and this is all sort of in the back of the mind of Aeneas as he's sailing away from Troy. We're going to hear all of his stories, just like Odysseus in the Odyssey tells his stories. Aeneas is going to tell his stories in book 1 and 2 and 3 of the Aeneid. We're going to get there here real soon, but first we have to hear what Juno's got planned for him. Juno goes to King Aeolus. He's the king of the winds. The gods have given him control of the winds. If you remember, Odysseus visits him too to get some winds and almost gets home, but then his men open the bag of winds and everything gets messed up, and he gets sent back out into the ocean. It takes him 10 more years after that. That was one of the first things he did, was went to the king of the winds, got his winds, thought he would make it home easily, doesn't. Well, anyway, Juno goes to him and says, hey, I want some of your winds, and I want to use those winds to make storms to make it really, really hard for Aeneas to get home. I don't like Aeneas. I don't want him to found the Roman people. Ugh, I don't like him, right? And so she offers him a nymph, Deopia, is the loveliest of her nymphs. She says, I'll marry you to one of these lovely nymphs if you'll do it. And he says, of course I'll do it. Of course he'll do it. Oh, and here in the note too, book 10 of the Odyssey was where we saw Odysseus, equivalent of the Roman Ulysses, meets Aeolus. So we've seen him before, right? Anyway, so here's the winds. Let's jump on down. So she gets the winds. The south wind hurls 3 ships on hidden rocks. The east wind drives 3 others from the deep. So she destroys a bunch of Aeneas's ships. 6 here, and then it looks like we've got the sturdy ships. It doesn't say how many of Aeneas has, but some of his ships, a few more. We're going to find out later in a few minutes. We find out he left with 20 ships, and at this point in book 1 he has 7, so 14 total ships get destroyed, right? And then Neptune, which is the Roman name for Poseidon. And Poseidon, we saw lots of him in the Odyssey, right? He wakes up and he's kind of like, what's going on? What's going on, right? And he goes to Aeolus and he goes to the winds and he says, you stop this. I don't, this is my ocean. You can't make these storms on it and crash these ships without my permission, and I don't give that permission. So he calms the surge, drives away the clouds, and brought back lights. Brought back the light, the daylight. And there's a beautiful example of Homeric simile here. Now it's not Homeric, it's Virgil, but it's still we can still call it Homeric simile, but we can also call it epic simile if we want to be less confusing about it. Either one works, right? Anyway, here's the storm clearing. So anytime we approach a simile or a metaphor, we ask ourselves first, what are the 2 things being compared? Second, we ask ourselves, what's the significance of the comparison? So let's read this and do our analysis. As often happens when a riot blazes in a great city and the masses rage, the rocks and torches fly, supplied by fury. But if they glimpse a man whose faithfulness and service to the state command respect, they stand in silence with attentive ears. His words restrain their rage and calm their hearts. So did the uproar on the sea subside after the father, meaning Poseidon, scanning its expanse, climbed with his horses through the cloudless sky and gave free rein to his responsive team. All right, so what are the 2 things being compared? A big, huge riot in a city and it's more complicated. It's not just the riot, but it's the riot being calmed down by a man full of faithfulness and service. And then the sea is being calmed down by Poseidon. So if you just say a riot is being compared to a hurricane, that's missing part of the point. You need a little bit more here. And that's what makes Homeric simile a little bit deeper than just other, more modern simple similes. There's always this complexity, or at least there's often quite a bit of complexity, right? And this is a little more complex. So this man who has faith and service, that man must be also like Poseidon, right? So what's the significance of the comparison? Poseidon is this great force who must be obeyed, right? And people, and in his case, nature itself will respect his authority. Beautiful example, very early in the first pages of the Aeneid, of Virgil imitating Homer by writing this simile right here. All right, so here we get the part, Aeneas gets where he's going with 7 ships still after the storm. We're going to find out in a moment where he is. He lands and does a little bit of exploration, and we get remember there's lots of hard names here, but when you encounter hard names, that's okay. We have strategies for reading through those. Some interesting ones though, Scylla. She gets mentioned in book 12 of the Odyssey, and the Cyclops. We're going to hear more about them. Actually, we're not. That's in one of the books we're skipping over. But he sails past the same Cyclops island that Odysseus lands on, and he gets pelted with rocks by them, or boulders. So there's some references here that should look familiar. Now this is an important part. I didn't mention this yet. Aeneas is a son of a goddess. He is a son of Venus, also known in Greek myth as Aphrodite, right? Aphrodite and Venus are the same. She comes to him at this point, but she's disguised, and she gives him some information. Um, and what's interesting here, let's read the information she gives. Also another name to know, Cytherea is another name as well for Venus. So that's a place where she is revered, and she gets the name of the place sometimes. Anyway, your people's destiny remains unchanged. As promised, you will see Lavinium and lift your brave Aeneas to the stars. Oh, and this is who is this talking to her? Oh yes, Venus has gone to talk to Jupiter, and he's assuring her the fates are not going to be changed. And he goes into some detail, Jupiter, about what the future holds, right? And remember, Virgil's writing this well after it happened. So it's interesting. He's writing it well after it happened, but it's still in some ways it's also a history of things that have already happened, even though Jupiter's saying it's going to happen in the future, right? Anyway, Romulus. And here we get the timescale. So, your son, meaning Aeneas, he's going to rule a place called Latium for 3 full winters. So he gets 3 years. He's going to be king over here where he rules. Ascanius, who's also called Iulus, he's going to be very important here in a moment. That's his son. He's going to get 30 years to reign, 30 cycling years in power, and then 300 more years until Romulus is born. Romulus is going to be the founder of Rome. So from Aeneas is the founder of Rome in a way, but it's 333 years later. All right. Anyway, he tells all the story all the way down to Julius Caesar. So we imagine in this conversation, thousands of years before Julius Caesar, Jupiter is saying there's going to be a Julius Caesar, and you can look forward to that. And he's going to, Carthage, tells the story of Carthage. Just for the sake of time, just kind of speeding along a little bit. Venus feels empowered. She goes down to her son in disguise, and Venus spoke to her son, and he says, have you seen any of my sisters out hunting? And he says, no, I haven't seen any of your sisters out hunting, but you don't look like a mortal. You have to be a goddess. And he goes on to list, like, which goddess might you be? And Venus plays along. She doesn't give up her true identity, even though this is a mother talking to a son. She doesn't tell him right away. And she tells him the story of the place where they've landed. And she tells him about Dido. She says Dido once had a husband named Sychaeus. He is a wealthy man, right? Well, Dido has a brother who ruled back in Tyre. He was a monster. And her brother Pygmalion, we find out, Venus tells Aeneas, so we find out as Venus tells Aeneas, her brother had her husband murdered, right? But her unburied spouse came in a dream, his face strangely pale as he revealed the deadly altar and his bloodied chest. Think of other places where we see ghosts come back and report that they were murdered, right? We see that in the play Hecuba, where you see that in Shakespeare's Hamlet, this idea of a ghost coming back and revealing what's happened to him. So Dido runs. She gathers as much money and power as she can, and ships as she can, and men, and she comes and she builds Carthage. She builds a new city to escape her evil brother, right? And that works. And so Aeneas says, okay, I've made it. And then what's really funny, I love this line right here. As Venus turns to leave after giving him all this information, giving Aeneas, her son, all this information, her stride revealed a goddess in the flesh. And then poor Aeneas, he's like, why do you, just as heartless as the rest, so often mock your son with lying visions? Why can I never take your hand in mine or speak with you in honest conversation? Why would my mother come to me in a disguise? Okay, I'm going to jump way ahead just a bit because I want to get through. I'm looking at my time, and I've taken a little too long on the first part here, so I'm going to move along. So he wanders in. Let's see here. I do want to point out this cloak of mist that keeps coming up. That cloak of mist. I didn't mean to highlight that. The cloak of mist. So they're hidden, and Aeneas and one of his closest friends, they go into the city, and they meet Dido. Oh, there's so much good stuff here. I'm going to kind of just gloss over really quickly. They meet Dido, and Dido accepts them into the city, right? And Aeneas reveals who he is. I stand before your eyes, the man you seek, Trojan Aeneas. And she's very happy. And in the conversation, she had met one of Aeneas's comrades who had also survived the storm and welcomed him. And Aeneas sees that, and Dido says, "Oh, I wish I could meet Aeneas too." So he jumps out and says, "Here I am." Right? Lots of good stuff, and I'm gonna kind of hurry right along. Now, Cytherea, or Scyth. These names are so hard to pronounce, and this is not one I pronounce very often. Cytherea, or Cytherea, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's Venus, right? And she gets her son Cupid. We all know who Cupid is. Think Valentine's Day, right? He can change his shape and disguise himself, and he disguises himself. He's going to disguise himself as Ascanius. That, remember, we said earlier, that's Aeneas' little boy, his son, and inflame the queen to frenzy with his gifts to make her burn with love, right? So I'm speeding right along. So now Cupid, doing as his mother said, was trailing cheerfully behind Achates to bring the Tyrians their royal gifts. So Aeneas sends for his son, but it's not his son who comes, it's Cupid, because Aphrodite, or Venus rather, I should use her Roman name, Venus has a plan, and she's just a little tricky, right? And her plan is this poor Venetian queen, that's Dido, doomed to a sickness of love that would soon set in, could not stop gazing at the boy, that's Cupid, disguised as Aeneas' son Ascanius, and gifts, her heart aflame. She was memorized. From time to time she held him, Cupid, on her lap, not knowing that a god of so much strength was taking hold to bring her misery. Love is not a good thing here, right? He began to make the queen forget Sychaeus, her former husband, and sought to captivate her dormant heart so long deserted with a living love. Anyway, so now we move to book 2, and I'm going to just kind of jump right ahead, where we get the story being told. And before I jump to book 2, I want to show one painting real quick that kind of captures this just a little bit. So this back here. And here we are. This is a painting from 1815 by an artist named Pierre Narcisse Guérin. He's drawn or painted Aeneas tells Dido the misfortunes of Troy. So here we see Aeneas, and he's going to tell his stories Dido wants to hear. And here is Queen Dido listening to the story. We haven't talked about her yet, but I think this is Anna. I haven't mentioned her name yet. She's a sister of Dido. And this little boy everyone thinks it's Ascanius, but it's actually Cupid in disguise, and he's casting his magic on to poor Dido, and that magic is not good for her, because she's going to fall in love, and that's going to be her ruin. Anyway, so Aeneas tells the story, and so remember, at the end of the Iliad, we don't get the end of the Trojan War, right? And then in the Odyssey, we hear bits and pieces about the Trojan horse. Virgil is going to fill in a lot of those gaps for us, of stories of how, and the book 2 is all about the fall of Troy. It's all the stuff that the Iliad leaves out, right? So we're going to hear about the Trojan horse. They build this big, huge, hollow horse, and they trick the Trojans into bringing it inside of their city. And remember, inside the Trojan horse, all these Greek soldiers are hiding, and they're going to come out of it later. And a Trojan guy named Laocoon came blazing from the heights when he sees the horse, and he knows that this is a trick. He's a very smart fellow. Our note tells us he's a Trojan priest of Neptune, right? So he comes out and he says, "Don't you know Ulysses' ways by now? Ulysses is evil, right? Either Achaeans, which is a word for Greeks, hide inside this wood, which is actually what's happening, or this machine was made to breach our walls, to spy or strike the city from above, or some other cunning lurks within. Beware this horse," right? But unfortunately, the Trojans are not going to believe him. They're not going to take his warning seriously. He throws a heavy spear at the rounded belly of the horse. The shaft stood trembling. and the hollow womb resounded with a groan when it was struck, and all these Greek men are inside, including Ulysses, including Agamemnon and Menelaus and all of them, right? But then, here's the tricky part. A guy named Sinon comes out, and he's a Greek guy, and he claims that the Greeks abandoned him, turned on him, don't respect him, and he doesn't care what happens to the Greeks. Because of that, he's going to tell the truth about this Trojan horse. Well, it's all a big fraud. Sinon is lying, right? So he gives this long explanation of who he is, and then he says, so he gives this long explanation. I'm going to skip it. Maybe we'll find another time to talk about it, but I'll skip it for now just because I'm running a long time. I've got about 10 minutes left, and I've got to get to the meaty stuff, right? Priam feels sorry for this guy Sinon, lets him free, and he says, tell me the truth. Why'd they build this horse? So here's Priam. Why is this horse here? What's their intention? Who's designed it? Is it an offering or tool of war? And Sinon, who's skilled in the art of Greek deceit, he's trained by Ulysses himself, Odysseus himself, goes on and explains, well, Ulysses did a great horrible thing. He did something bad in Athena's temple and made Athena mad, so the Greeks built this horse to Athena to ease her anger, right? They built this effigy in place of the profane Palladium to make atonement for their sacrilege. And he says, if your hands defile Minerva's gift, Minerva is the name for Athena, Minerva's gift, then total devastation will come down on Priam's kingdom. If you destroy this horse, Athena, Minerva, will be very angry. If your hands assist in hauling it into your city, though, Asia, which in this case means Troy, Troy represents kind of all of Asia to the Greeks, will advance Pelops' walls and wage a mighty war, such is the fate. So if you take it into your city, then Athena, Minerva, will be on your side now. So that's a good thing, right? Take it into your city. And all of a sudden, to help out a little bit, Athena sends a couple of giant snakes out of the ocean, and they attack Laocoon. Each serpent snatched one of his sons. The father grabbed a sword and leapt to help, but the serpent seized the man and wrapped him tight in their thick spirals, heads and necks held high, their scaly backs wound twice around his waist and twice around and they kill him right there. And everyone says, oh, this was the guy who said to destroy the horse, and now he's being punished by Athena for it. Well, Athena's just part of the trick. She's just helping the trick along, the same as Sinon. And they say he deserved to pay. He struck the sacred timber with his spear. So they place the horse on the wheels, they pull it in, and of course, in the night, and of course here we get Cassandra again too. Remember, Cassandra is the one who can see the future, but no one believes her. And she tells them, she's here, prophesied our coming doom, but by the gods' command, the Teucrians, another name for the Trojans, would never trust her words. So Sinon, now in the city of Troy, undoes the bolts in the secret, and he frees the Greeks inside. Listen to all the names coming out. Ulysses jumps out, some others, but let's look at this one. Neoptolemus, whose father was the son of Peleus. It's a really long way to say this is Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. We meet him in the Sophocles play Philoctetes, right? And we're going to see him referenced in Hamlet as well. Neoptolemus. He has another name too. He also goes by Pyrrhus. Anyway, he comes out, and they do horrible things, right? They sack Troy, destroy everything Trojan, take all the wealth for itself, enslave all the children and women, kill almost all of the men, except for some who escape, and a bunch of them escape with Aeneas, we're about to see, but most of them are just slaughtered, right? While this is happening, Hector, remember Hector died at the end of the Iliad, he comes to Aeneas in a dream and says, child of a goddess, go, escape the flames. Enemies, hold the walls. High Troy is falling. Troy trusts her sacred household gods to you. So this is important, right? Aeneas is about to take all the wealth of Troy that he can manage to get out of the city real quickly, which can't be that much, but he's got at least the household gods and some important stuff, and he leaves. Well, how can a hero be someone who ran away from a fight? But Virgil's very careful in how he explains it. And part of the explanation, we're going to get more in a moment, part of the explanation, he was told to do it by Hector. Hector came to him in his sleep and told him that he needs to get out of there. The horse pulls out the soldiers. Oh, here we get an interesting character briefly mentioned, Coriolanus. He's a youth who came to Troy just days before, and he had frenzied passion for Cassandra. He was supposed to marry her, but he didn't believe his raving bride. He should have, right? So poor Cassandra got married to this guy, or was about to be married to this guy. And even her fiance doesn't believe her prophecies, and she can't get them to stop. And he dies here in the fight, right? Lifeless bodies lay scattered along the streets inside our homes. And Aeneas is wandering about. Here we see Cassandra again being dragged out of Minerva's shrine. So remember, Minerva's Athena. That's what I mentioned before. That's the other Ajax has raped her and is dragging her off into slavery now, and they try to attempt to rescue her. We know that's not going to be successful because we know she's going to end up going back with Agamemnon to Greece, right? So we get all these details, and for a moment Aeneas puts on, they manage to kill a group of Greeks, and they put on their armor and they fight. So Virgil's showing them he doesn't just run away like Hector told him to do. He gets together some men, they fight, but they all fall, they die. So here, when they were trying to rescue Cassandra, here's her husband there, her husband or fiance. I'm not sure if they were already married or about to be married. He was the first to die. Others, and then this list of others that die. And here he says, "Bear witness that I never ran away. If it had been my fate to die that night, I earned it fighting with the Danaans, the Greeks, but I was torn from there." So he says, I did fight, and I didn't leave on purpose, right? The end was near, the door was closing in, and death was closing in. Let's see here, there's a hidden door. We meet Andromache, she's alone. Remember, that's Hector's wife, we get a mention of him. And then here we go, here's the part that we've got to spend at least a couple minutes on. Pyrrhus, another name for Neoptolemus. We met him in Sophocles' play, Philoctetes. Here he comes, and he's like a snake that shelters underground in frigid winter, gorged on deadly weeds. Another example of Homeric simile, right? Neoptolemus, or Pyrrhus, is like a snake. His double axe smashed through doors, tears them apart, and he comes into the private rooms of Priam. The vaulted mansion howled with women's cries. Terrified mothers roamed the halls, and Pyrrhus surged forward with his father's strength. So Pyrrhus has strength like Achilles, right? No bolts or guards could hold off his advance. He forges a path. We get a nice simile of a river bursting its banks here, Homeric simile. And Aeneas says, Dido, do you want to hear the fate of Priam? And so he tells what happens, and it's horrible. Here we got Hecuba hiding with her daughters around the altar. They're all clutching it, holding on. Priam wants to fight, but Hecuba pulls him back. Poor husband, have you lost your mind? Where are you rushing? Why take up your arms? No guardian can save us anymore. Not even my Hector, if he were still here. Come, please, this altar will protect us all. So they all wrap their arms around the altar, the equivalent of being in a church or a chapel that's in their palace, holding it and like, okay, at least now nobody will hurt us. Pyrrhus doesn't care. He comes in and he kills. First he kills one of Priam's sons right in front of him, and then he kills Priam as he holds onto the altar. That would be the equivalent in 21st century of America of slaughtering someone in a church while they were hugging the pulpit or hugging a cross, or it's a horrible, horrible symbol. You can't do that. This is a horrible crime that Neoptolemus commits. He says, Priam says, your father was never like this. Because remember in book 24 of the Iliad, remember the humanity that Achilles eventually shows. It took a little bit, but he shows humanity to Priam. Neoptolemus does not. Aeneas sees him slaughtered, sees Hecuba scream and cry, sees all this, and it reminds him of his own father. And he runs back to save him. And I'm almost at time, so there's so much good stuff here. This is such a wonderful story. Horrible story, but it fills in all these gaps and details that Homer left. This is a great moment too. So Venus tears away the misty clouds, and for a moment Aeneas sees Poseidon, Neptune, Juno, Athena, Jove, another name for Jupiter or Zeus, sees them without the mist, sees them as they are, and he's like, oh my gosh. He grabs his son, his little baby son, grabs his wife, grabs his father, and they make a run for it. Now, sadly, his wife Creusa doesn't make it. She gets lost. He goes back for her. Can't find her. And her ghost appears and says, keep going, keep going. So all this time, as he makes this escape, we keep getting, and I'm kind of rushing through now at the end. I could spend another 40 minutes easily doing all these details, but he rushes through with his son, his father. He's lost his wife. He gets together with a group of other Trojans, and they set sail. They've got 20 ships when they first leave. And this is the first part. And in book 3, and you can read the summary of book 3 here is provided for us, he continues the story of the fall of Troy. So read this carefully. Make sure you know book 1 and 2 well. Make sure you know the story of Troy well. We're going to skip over book 3, and in the next video lecture, jump to books 4 and 6. All right. We'll move on to that right away. Looking forward to talking more. Books 4 and 6 up next.